The Fargo Five, I'm Conrad Fargo. We're here, Fargo Famous. We've got Tony Tilton. Hello, Tony.
Hi, Conrad.
Thanks for coming on today. You are with Moorhead Public Access, but more importantly, Valleycon.
I'm the chairman of Valleycon, that's correct.
Now, Valleycon is the longest-running, most attended, largest festival of popular culture featuring sci-fi, fantasy, comics, anime, horror, gaming, and film and TV.
That's right. Basically between Minneapolis and Seattle. We've been around a long time. This is Valleycon 48 years.
48, moving on 50 years.
Yep.
That's as longer than I've been alive. That's impressive. And so what, you are the chair of that.
Yes.
How did you get to be the chair of Valleycon?
Well, that's a long story. When I was a kid, I went to my first Valleycon. That was Valleycon 3.
Wow.
And it was at the Sons of Norway. Kind of, was just getting into comic books, had a paper out. My brother and I both had paper out, so we had some money to burn.
And how old were you at this time?
I can't remember what it was, 10, 11, 12 years old, somewhere in there.
Okay.
And so after a year or two of going to them, I joined up while I was in high school and helped to run things for a little bit. Then I had, even at that early age, I had a lot of professional background in theater and stuff through my parents. And I started working at KTHI at the time, back when I was a junior in high school. So I joined the club and helped to run it for a little bit. Went off to the Navy, and then when I came back, I joined up again to bump it up a bit.
With Valleycon.
Yeah, Valleycon.
Okay, and so this first one, the first one you went to, number 3, that was in 1975?
No, it was later than that.
85.
No.
I'm doing math here. I'm standing here trying to think.
There's a couple of Valleycons that were 2 years together. So I mean, it's 48th annual Valleycon, 47 years. It was 76 was the first Valleycon.
Oh, okay.
So it would have been 78, 79, somewhere like that.
Because you guys are everything. Gosh, I don't know what is the theme here. Between sci-fi and fantasy.
Yeah, well, Valleycon started as a comic book show.
Yeah,
it was a comic book vendor show with showing films and costume contests, a basic convention. Back in the 70s. Conventions were just starting to really take off.
They weren't even a thing, really.
Well, I mean, they started getting big with the Star Trek conventions in the early 70s. When Star Trek was originally on the air, it went off the air, went into syndication, became a huge hit in syndication.
Yeah.
And all the fans started doing conventions. They had one in New York that they thought would get 300 people, and they had 15,000 people coming.
Wow.
And this is when the original crew was going to, and they were astounded. And that's kind of what kicked off all of that stuff. There had been conventions before. I mean, I don't want to, World Fantasy Convention stuff have been around since the 40s, but really this kind of convention is where it started at that time. So Fargo picked it up, and Rudy Sigmund owned the Fantasy Collector. It was the first comic book store in Fargo, and it used to be on 8th Street, right, just half a block south of Main.
Oh,
and
where it's now that's Sanford, right? Like that's a parking.
No,
isn't that a parking lot?
No. It's there's a little boutique shop there still.
Over near Nicole's. Near Nicole's.
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
Nicole's,
Now I can picture
it. It was Dutch made growing up for us.
Oh wow.
But yeah, it was just a couple doors north of that, and next door was Ernie's Used Bookstore, which was a mainstay old used bookstore.
Yeah.
So you go in there and Ernie'd be smoking constantly and everything. So all the books smelled like cigarette smoke. But I mean, I got a lot of used paperbacks cheap back in the day. So as a kid growing up, it was inexpensive.
Yeah.
To go and collect.
So what was your draw to Valleycon? So you were really into comic books, or you were a Trekkie, or
my brother and I were everything.
All of the above?
We were into comics and collecting and sci-fi fantasy. You got to realize back then it was not like it is now. You had 3 channels of television.
Yeah.
You had to go to movies when they came out. And you didn't see older films except on TV, and even shows like Star Trek you'd only see in syndication. So it was hard to find stuff. So an event like this was like, oh cool, we got to go and check it out. It's all these vendors with all this stuff, and we'd go nuts spending a lot of money there.
Because that would be the only way you would ever maybe meet another Trekkie.
Very much
right?
So.
Because like today you can meet 100,000 people on the internet.
Right.
But you didn't have the internet back then.
This is a way to meet people and just go and have fun. And it was costume contest, and it wasn't Halloween, so you could do it, at different times and stuff like that. Valleycon was always in the fall, usually in September, actually, for a long time. It was early, mid-September for the first several years. But, I joined up as a member of the thing because Rudy started Valleycon, but he only ran it for the first year. And then other people took over from there and turned it into it was a club. What we wind up doing is after I joined, we had run a couple of these events, and I said, we need to have some kind of nonprofit status because this is kind of dangerous just running this as a club function.
Yeah.
Tax issues and everything else. So I wrote the nonprofit paperwork, and this was long before it was fill in the blank. You had to research it in the law library.
So Valleycon's a 501c3.
Well, it's not a 501c3. It is a nonprofit organization. We didn't get the tax exempt thing because we didn't pursue it at the time.
I see.
So, so we go through a different 501c3 for Valleycon. But the thing is that we did get an official nonprofit organization, and we've had that ever since the early 80s. So Valleycon started off that way. I was part of it. I left, came back, and then when I came back after the service, I wasn't involved for several years. I was married, and she was not into stuff at all. So after we divorced, after about a couple of years, and I kind of got back involved with it with some other friends of mine, and I were all similar interests, and we would go to Valleycon, but we hadn't pursued it. But at the time, it was kind of being run as like a private club for geeks, and it was very closeted in that way. And the thing is, it was kind of seen as this redheaded stepchild of events in Fargo. It was a small event, 100 or 200 people go into it, similar to other events nowadays, And it was one of those things that some of those people wanted to keep it quiet. I'm going like, why aren't you expanding and trying to encourage other people to join? Get out of the closet a little bit and be proud of what you're doing. Don't be freaked out about it. And I use the analogy. I said, if sports fans can dress up and go to a game and put on makeup and shout and scream, why are you ashamed of being in your Spock ears or whatever the hell it is?
Exactly.
And so that was the whole impetus. So we took over and ran it for quite a few years from Valleycon 12 basically to 19. And at the time, it was a nonprofit structure, so trying to get anything done was very near impossible. I mean, it was committee structure on everything, and it took a lot of effort, and it was a lot of banging heads and a lot of egos involved, and I got tired of it and left after 19. So I was gone for 5 years, and then they started contacting me again to come back. I built it up in that time. We had Nichelle Nichols come here. That was our first big media guest. Mostly authors and artists. I mean, that's really what Valleycon was. It was replicating what Minneapolis was doing, where you have authors and artists come to your event. And we would invite some really good authors and stuff, but, you have the disadvantage, unfortunately, of being in a part of the country that it costs 3 times as much to bring anybody to than if you're in Minneapolis. You could fly somebody from anywhere to Minneapolis for $200.
Yep.
Whereas getting to Fargo is $600-700 minimum.
Yes.
And it increases your costs exponentially for everything. And you're not dealing with 4 million people in that, like Minneapolis, or you're dealing with, at the time, 200,000, right?
Yep.
So, and you're counting on people to come in. So the big part is you have to advertise to let people know what's going on. Well, the budget, was stretched quite a bit, and we stretched the budget quite a bit for a while there. But it was about as much as you could do at the time. So I left, and they kind of went back to being a small event. They would still have some guests come in, but there were only a couple hundred people going to the event. So they asked me to come back and help take it over again and boost it up, because what happened was that the club part, that was a there was a club, which is the nonprofit that sponsors the event Valleycon. The people running it at the time had the opinion that, well, Valleycon's too much work. Let's just get rid of it. And I said, the whole point of the club was to be a front for Valleycon, for the nonprofit part of it, to run this event. Yes. Which is the whole impetus, was to get people involved and stuff like that, not just a club where you sit around and chit chat about sci-fi.
Exactly.
I said, you want to do that? You can do that for free in your living room. You go do that.
When
is
almost
what this is
almost
for.
like the idea is to expand,
Exactly.
not just have the same group of people week after week after week,
Exactly.
but something that is going out and pulling new people in.
Yeah, and the people running it at the time just were not suited to that, and that's no feeling on their part. That was just the way it was. It's just they weren't used to that. It intimidated them and scared them to jump into something where it's thousands of dollars you're dealing with, and it can be intimidating. You have to deal with that stuff and learn how to deal with it. So they decided to leave, and I came back to take over the club. This is right after 2001. So after 9/11, Valleycon ran that group ran their last Valleycon in the basement of the Howard Johnson. That's where they were at for the last couple years, because frankly, no place would have Valleycon at the time.
Yeah.
It turned into what I had been described, what they described to me, hotel people and the Convention Visitors Bureau people and everything said it's a drunken frat party for geeks. What it turned into, and that's
That sounds like a good time.
Well, it is to a point, but the thing is, nobody would rent to you. Nobody
Yeah.
wants that.
Yeah.
No business wants that. No hotel wants that. So that's why they were in the basement of the Howard Johnson. The Doublewood at the time, which is the Ramada now, used to be our mainstay because it was convenient. You could set up parties around the poolside and everything like that.
Uh-huh.
They wouldn't have them because they let things go crazy there. They had people jumping out the railings of the second level
Oh, my
into the
goodness.
pool and things like that. Yeah, anybody that gets hurt, you're all done. It's incredible liability. And there's a fine point to having fun and to not being an idiot. And that unfortunately, it just wasn't being properly done. So you had to come in and had to be a cop a bit and slap a few things around and say, this is not going to happen anymore. And that's what I did. And so I made a few enemies at the time, but say la vie, that's life and business. But if they don't understand that, it was their immaturity at that point, that they didn't get that you just can't do this. And they weren't privy to the conversation. I tell them what the conversation was with civic leaders, city leaders. Said, you're not going to get anywhere if this happens. Look what's happened in nightclubs in town that have had issues. They don't get their liquor license, they get shut down. I mean, the same thing goes with an event.
Yeah, Fargo can be a strict place to be.
Well,
you
place
have
would
been
be,
a part of so many things. You also do, Moorhead Public Access, which we didn't even touch on. We are moving to our music break.
Oh, sure.
We will come back. I want to talk more of the details of
Sounds good.
Valleycon. We are going to listen to Cut Your Hair by Pavement, and we'll be right back, so don't go nowhere.